Hey Dan, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
So today we're gonna transition to our conversation that we had with Scott and Suzanne about the new editions of the Fit manuals. So the listener will probably have seen you and I kind of doing our review of the book. Scott and Suzanne have listened to that, and then we had a conversation where we got to kind of, drive ourselves into the corners of some of the areas that we wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I actually found that session very rewarding, enlightening. You know, I mean, I guess it's a little bit of a new experience to me to actually speak to somebody who's written a book and sort of find out a little bit about their internal process. And so I think that was the best aspect for me.
Yeah, and to see the motivation of even the process and the motivation for what inspired this new edition. I've spent much more time talking with Scott than Suzanne, so it was really nice to spend more time talking with Suzanne about her motivation as well. Um, I don't know, anything else to add, or should we get to that
Yeah, I think we
interview?
should get to. I was just also thinking that the book seems, I mean, there, I want to say it seems simple in the way that it's laid out in the the flow and the process, and I think we got a new appreciation for sort of how much work it was
Oh
and how
yeah,
difficult it was to put it together.
totally, absolutely. I totally agree with you. And with that, let's transition over to our chat with Scott and Suzanne.
Great.
So good morning, everybody. For me, it's good morning. I guess I've been on a number of fit intensives where people are from all over the world, but this is really four people from pretty much kind of going around the globe.
It is. Australia, Denmark, Florida. Amazing.
California. So we're here today to talk to the authors of the new feedback informed treatment manual. Previously, Will and I did a review, and so we decided to invite the authors to kind of discuss what our review and I guess maybe the future of fit and maybe all kinds of things that
I'm
might
wondering how you found us, Dan. You know, we
Well, Will and I actually go over our own fit stories in our review. I guess we took a little detour there.
It's
Well,
okay.
absolutely. And it's like, I don't know how everyone else's Zoom screen is set up, but I see, Scott and Dan, I've listened to you, review books, review my book. And then Suzanne and Scott, I mean, Scott, the first time we met was, I think, over a little over 10 years ago when Suzanne and Scott, you did a fit intensive for me. And it was riveting. I remember walking up 30 flights of stairs. It was fantastic. I loved it. My legs have never been so sore. It was so fun, and Chicago's really cold.
Yeah.
No, it's a wonderful opportunity to talk with you all about this revision and this new edited work. So it's
Good.
exciting.
The first question that I have is that if and I think you have seen our review. I know that I don't want to say disappointed, but it's a feeling of almost longing for why aren't more therapists, more people that, try to practice the talking cure, why aren't they adopting fit? Why aren't they interested in it? Why doesn't it speak to them like it speaks to me?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I loved that you had that conversation when I saw the review that you did of the manuals because I think it's a question that puzzles me too. Why aren't more people doing it? Um, but I think when we were writing the manuals, the place where we had these conversations was when we were writing the implementation manual. Because I agree with you, Dan. It seems that it's so logical. You would want to look at your outcomes. You would want to focus on being helpful to people. But in the real world, a lot of things get in the way, even if an idea is really good. So I think when we were writing about implementation, at least for me and maybe also for you, Scott, new realizations happened of things that detour or even derail implementations or make people lose the focus on something that seems really valuable.
Mm.
I think one of the additions that for me was interesting was when you work in a setting with more people and a leader, and you don't have a succession plan when the leader leaves the agency. That was one of the things that we added to the new edition of the manuals because it seems it's something that's screaming at you once you realize it, but it's something that I've missed. I know I've missed it in implementations,
Mm.
making sure that we have a plan for what to do when things change.
And following the science in that particular area,
Yeah.
which is also emergent. I add to that, Suzanne, that I have sort of a long-term view of change, that it's easy to look at the changes that have happened or apparently have happened in our field and assume that it doesn't really have an uptake. But the truth is, over the last 50 years, there have been few substantive changes in psychotherapy, very few. It looks a lot the same as it's looked for
Mm.
most of its existence. It's done almost the same as it's done. There have been some big changes. For example, at least in the United States, mental health is now part of the healthcare system. You can call and get an appointment. You can have that appointment paid for by insurance or by government funding, et cetera. People are licensed and they are held accountable by their professional organizations to some extent. Those are kind of big picture items. The rest, to me, it looks a lot like changing skirt lengths and lapel widths on a French fashion runway. They get wider, they get smaller, but they're still basically clothes. And it's a lot about fashion. Semmelweis had this amazing realization about the death of women on maternity wards and thought it had something to do with hand washing. And still, you are in the public restroom and you see people leave without washing their hands. We're talking 200 years ago. So I think the idea of being concerned about failing cases and additionally measuring that and attending to that. And then third, what Suzanne is saying, figuring out what you're going to do and how you're going to get the system to make a change. Whoa,
Mm.
those are long-term projects.
But I want to push a little bit into this that one of the things I know I hear from students or colleagues that pick up fit is they say, yes, I downloaded the measures and they were free, and then it didn't really help. And I know that Dan and I are, already, converts to this, that we know why it didn't help for us. What do you think is going on for clinicians of any level of experience that they get to this place where they download these measures, kind of like buying a blood pressure cuff for your general physician, and then say, "Oh, but that doesn't really help me." It does. What's the barrier there? And I don't want to blame those clinicians. What do you all think is going on?
I can say from personal experience, because I'm one of those therapists that when I first encountered FIT, I printed out the forms and I started trying them out in my own work. But pretty quickly you're very alone with all the information you get. And I didn't know what to do with it. There wasn't any support around me. So even though you're a single practitioner, there still needs to be some system around you to ensure that you have somebody to talk to about the feedback you're getting. Because sometimes you realize, at least I realized, that I wasn't using the tools correctly. But I couldn't figure out how to do it better until I started doing consultation with Scott. You need support. You need that somehow built into the plan of wanting to measure your outcomes. If you don't have that, you're going to lose it. At least I did for a while. I lay down the SRS and I thought it wasn't helpful to me. But really, it was because I didn't know what to do.
And let me just add to that that most of the time you're not going to get a signal. So think about just reward and punishment. Most of the time, asking for feedback is punishing in the sense that you get no feedback. That it's a rare event that you have made an error that the client noticed that impacts their outcome. There's a whole chain of events that has to happen. So the rewards and punishments are completely off. And that's why I think this new study that came out this last summer was led by the Brattleboro Group, Dave Brown, Kevin Gallagher, several others were involved, that showed that if you had an early ratifying experience with the measures, that this helped people, which also fits with learning theory. If you think
Mm.
about it, you have this event that stands out to you, and suddenly you think you're looking for that experience again,
Mm.
as opposed to most of the time you're not going to get very much.
I don't want to get too far off track or in the weeds, but I've had this thought. I wonder, so Will talked about in his review that we print out the paper measures on a laminated card with dry erase markers. And I, because I mean, I guess I think of most people that do therapy as sort of, I mean, I hate to generalize, but sort of less scientific and more sort of intuitive, relationship centered. And I wonder if, when we talk about these data collection programs and we start talking about effect sizes and the aggregate data, I wonder if we sort of kind of turn people off, or it seems like we're sort of reducing therapy to science rather than sticking, even though in my mind, I feel like fit really does dig into the intuitive side of things. I just wonder if there's a disconnect that happens.
I definitely think, and this was true even before the data systems. So when I used the paper and pencil version, I was using a ruler and I was adding up numbers. And
I
as soon
still
as,
use a ruler.
yeah, I know you still do, but adding up numbers and as soon as something becomes facts, there is a risk of what you're talking about, Dan, that we lose sight of what this actually is. Because even though we get a number, or even if we get statistics on outcomes, it's still the same service. It's still trying to be of help to the clients, and it's still being concerned whenever we realize we're not being helpful, trying to figure out what am I supposed to do. It's actually not very scientific. It's still really therapeutic. But I get what you're saying. There seems to be, as soon as numbers come in, we begin to confuse it with science or facts when in fact it's the same, but we're getting feedback that we didn't get without the measures.
I think in terms of talking points, at least, if that's the way we're viewing the challenge here, which I'm skeptical about, that one positive benefit of fit is you are free to practice in whatever way you want. We've been trying to resolve this issue of divergence of clinical theories and methods under the rubric of evidence-based practice. You can only do this. So we're going to legislate that you will only be paid if you practice these particular ideas. But fit basically says, within reason, you can do whatever you want clinically as long as it fits community standards. And if it works, what the heck? The extension of that is that includes things outside the traditional mental health care system, like rowing around in a canoe in the outback with an objective of helping young people feel better about their lives, themselves, etc. That's pretty remarkable, as opposed to going down the same old research track of are there 3 studies that say that this actually helps people? What are you doing in the canoe that's helping people? And did you do it in order? Did you put your left foot in first and your right in, and then the canoe? I mean, so that's one big advantage in terms of the talking points about
Mm.
fit. I think that however, I challenge this idea that this is really about marketing.
Hmm.
I think this is about probability. So let's go back to my gross example of leaving the toilet without washing your hands. The problem with that is you don't have 100% of consequences when you do that. Only occasionally do you have a consequence when you or someone else end up ill because you're passing along some germ.
And
And
you
even
don't
then,
even know, sometimes you don't even know that that was the cause, even though it
it,
was.
exactly.
You're not doing
And
an experiment.
you're not doing an experiment, which Fit basically says, who cares what the cause was? Just notice and let's go and examine what could we do differently.
I think when we bring up the marketing, I think it's because of our interactions with other clinicians. It's not that the marketing didn't, or I wouldn't even call it marketing, that it didn't land on us. You know, you and I, Scott, have had many jokes about it'd actually be a lot easier if it was just the canoe to put it in an office and no one would have to paddle anywhere, drive anywhere, and no one would have to get wet in the water. It'd be a whole
Yeah.
lot easier
And
if
it wouldn't be
the canoe,
controversial because it's in the office.
yeah, it'd be fantastic. The thing I loved about reading the new book and what Dan and I talked about was it felt to me compared to the manuals of 10 or so, however many years ago,
Yeah, it's
there was
embarrassing
this
how long ago it was
Yeah.
actually. 2011,
thir
2012.
Yeah.
the bell that rang for me was that it felt like the culture of feedback was pushed to the top. It was, there were scripts about how to introduce these things in multiple different ways with different clinical populations. That to me, I wonder if there was between the two of you an intentional reason to move the culture part of it, like the part that isn't just about measuring or counting, which is that's the part that turns off therapists, right? Like we're not in this to count things. I wonder if that was intentional as you went to uh, make this new version of this.
I think we've successfully in the new manuals articulated more of the philosophy of fit. And you've heard probably Scott say many times that the ORS and SRS are the dumbest part of the process. And to me, the culture feedback is what it's all about. Can I create an atmosphere where the other person is willing to share with me if there is something of concern? And so I think that's one of the reasons why that has become more prominent in the new manuals. It's our attempt to try and make the philosophy more clear.
Hmm.
And I think culture is essential in many different levels implementing fit because that culture again becomes important if you want to introduce fit in an organization. It's not just about fit, it's about the whole shift. I think, Dan, you talked about it as being a paradigm shift. It is a different way of thinking about the work we do. So again, that cultural shift is much more important than the two measures. That you're able to, in a systematic way, gather feedback and actually use the feedback to do something different.
It's almost something that I would say, although I know I'm going to be upset with myself for saying it, it's a little bit hard to teach this. And here's the difference for me. If I go into a fast food restaurant and the person taking my order has a badge on that says, "We value your business, the customer comes first," then I know it's not true because you needed a badge to tell the customer that. There is this unspoken interaction between the two of us, and I'll know pretty quickly if you care about my business or not. Regardless, I'll be able to tell when I come back. I'll be able to tell by the feeling in the interview, the measures, and this whole the way we presented. I think culture feedback in the beginning reflected where we were in 2011, 2012. We were just trying to put words and tell people how to say this to others, but hopefully it is embodied throughout the entire manual.
I will say before Dan, you ask your next question, Scott, you probably saw this on social media, but my wife Renee had ankle surgery, I think a year and a half ago, and in the waiting room, it had a sign that said, "Scan this QR code and give your feedback, but they put a water cooler right in front of the QR code. And I was like, that is the funniest feedback form ever. It's like, what can we put in front of this to make sure no one gives feedback?
Looking back after reading the manuals, are there things that you would change? You know, is well, and there will be another question later about, is there going to be a second edition? What's the future of Fit? But are there things that you would, looking back now, would you change about the manuals?
It, I wish I could say that the process of editing the manuscript into galley form was easier than it was. The first edition that came out and probably sold 100 or so copies had errors in spelling. There were missing sentences, and the reason for that was that the manuscript was sent to the typesetter. The typesetter sent it back, and we would have to read the entire manual again, word for word. And each time you did that, send it back and forth for corrections, often new errors were introduced that were editing errors. If you look at the manuscript, they were in final form. And that's embarrassing, and that's on us. That is on us. What I am super grateful for, truly, in a feedback informed fashion, is that people wrote and said, hey, there's a sentence seems to be missing here on page 20 to 23. What gives? They didn't. There were a few people who gave feedback on Amazon, which made it difficult to correct. That said, this book is riddled with errors. It wasn't exactly riddled with errors, and that kind of feedback was less helpful. But it just shows how important it is to have people that are willing to say, I'm puzzled by this. That's what we're saying about therapy. You say this in the session, but your score says this. Could we talk about that? It's kind of this natural flow, or should be, between two people who are consulting together about matters that are deeply important to one of them. But the other question you asked, Suzanne, I don't know if you have a thought.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking as you were asking the question, Dan. For me, this is the torture of writing. Whenever something is done, I can read it and I want to change things. So I view this as good as we were able to create a manual at the time. But I'm sure that the manuals will need to be updated again with new learnings, because that's my feeling. We commit something to paper, I start using it in my work, and I learn new things. And so I would want to go back and add details or reflections, but that would mean we would never have a set of manuals. So I'm actually kind of proud of how much detail we were able to pack into the manuals. But I'm sure that we will need to do a new edition along the way.
It would be nice. I'm just fantasizing here about a future time when all of the manuals would be entirely electronic. And as new ideas came up, instead of having to rewrite the manuals from top to bottom, you could put a caveat, a bubble to the side, and say, here's what's meant by this. Here's a brand new study about that. Here's how we
style.
Yeah, wiki style.
Yeah.
So, speaking of that, and one of the things I think is all the philosophy readings that I read, a good philosopher will say, the reason I'm writing a new book is I used to think this, and then I figured out where I'm challenging myself, and now I think this, and then I'm going to write my next thing about this new thing. What do you think was the biggest thing the two of you took away from this new edition? What's the biggest sign of progress?
The thing is, we rewrote the whole thing. So I feel that there are actually massive changes to most of what was in the original manuals. And I feel proud of a lot of the things we've added, but in different ways. I feel proud that we, in chapter 2, added a section called When and When Not to Use Fit, because it's a question that comes up so many times as a trainer. What are the limitations of fit? Are there situations where you can't use it? And I feel proud that we were able to generate not sort of simple answers, but principles to consider when you want to consider, is fit the right thing for my setting? I feel super proud of the consultation chapter. The way that we've reconceptualized that practice and become much more articulate and clear. I feel extremely proud of that. And then I mean, the data chapter is is nothing like the original data chapter. I find it a lot more hands-on useful as somebody who actually works with a data system and gets the report. Um, and I think the implementation chapter, I mean, I do feel proud of most of it because I think we've changed it so much.
Hmm.
Um, and and at least my feeling is everything that was inside our heads and we've everything we've developed as we've been teaching people, we've managed to put into the manuals. It unfortunately doesn't mean it's complete yet, and
Hmm.
it doesn't mean no new ideas won't come up.
Hmm. I love this concept that Daryl Chow talks about called the illusion of explanatory depth.
Mhm.
And if you say and ask even folks that aren't deeply into fit, what is fit about, they will give you an idea of some general idea. Well, you measure and then you talk with your clients about when it's not working. Okay, I guess that's fit. But actually clearly articulating what's required to do it well and to get the benefit from it, that required Suzanne and I spending hours on the phone. And then we would write together, literally talking out, and doing that gave depth that wasn't illusory
Mm,
to the concepts we were talking about, especially in the areas you've mentioned already,
mm,
Suzanne. And I would add to that the implementation
yeah.
chapter. And early on, we didn't know what we didn't know. Now we're 10, 12 years beyond the first set of manuals, and implementation is the key challenge to almost all science. How do you take it from research findings that are intriguing to actually having application that practitioners who don't have days, hours, months, and years to study something, how do you get them to actually change practice patterns and alter organizational culture?
So are you were saying that the process of organizing and rewriting the whole thing that changed you in some way, or it changed your view of what fit is or how it's practiced? Is
I
there
think,
I
I think,
do. Oh,
no,
go ahead.
I was just going to say that, as Suzanne said earlier, it demanded that we become much more clear. And many times during the writing process, some parts didn't demand a whole lot of
clear
thought,
and specific,
clear
right?
and specific. So if you look at the research chapter, these are chapters that we've both written 100 times. And so now it's just trying to find some interesting logic that'll keep the reader involved for the duration of the chapter. But when you get to the chapters, say, on when to do and not do fit, this we had in different locations throughout the book at different times, and we talked about it completely differently. And it was only after writing and rewriting that we thought, how we're describing it here does not capture what's important, nor will it help people address the questions that they have about fit and whether or not it's applicable. There was a whole chapter that was not included. I won't say what it was about, that had been recommended by people who read early drafts. And we really struggled about how do we write about this in a way that it wouldn't become outdated or wouldn't lead to actually a proliferation of questions rather than a process people could follow for answering the questions themselves.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add because writing the manuals took several years. And so you have to view this as a process. And I'm just being transparent. It's a process of, for example, when we wrote the consultation chapter, the first part of the process was thinking together about all the mistakes we've made as fit consultants? Where is it that it goes off track? Where is it that people feel frustrated and not helped? What are the mistakes that we've made? And trying to list them and then figuring out how do these go together? And some of this required thinking together, then going out and doing consultation, coming back with realizations from practice and saying, this is probably what it's like. So in a sense, I feel that writing made us think more clearly, but it also made me practice in a little bit of a different way. And that added to the writing process, if that makes sense. It was sort of a back and forth over 2 years.
I want to stick with you, Suzanne, because you wrote a chapter in, was it the 2018 Fit book, about supervision.
Hmm.
And then in this one, there's the shift towards consultation.
Yeah,
And I have taught out of the 2018 chapter for, a few years now. And it was something, reading that chapter as someone who is running a small nonprofit, I just went, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense.
yeah,
This is so well written and perfect. Can you explain to someone who hasn't read the book, the newest uh, revision of these manuals, why the shift from supervision to consultation?
yeah. This is again, it sort of grew out of experiences with organizations. So Scott and I talked about how uh, there would typically be frustrations in groups that did fit supervision. Sometimes there would be confusion about what's the point of this and what's the difference between this and then the other supervision we do. And I also encountered groups where managers said, well, if you're having fit supervision, let's cut the other supervision and then replace it with fit supervision. And when Scott and I were talking, we realized that part of the problem was using the word supervision to describe the practice, because it really isn't. It isn't supervision, it's a different format for talking about cases. And I think this is why it became so important for us to write the intro to the chapter where we describe why we've moved from supervision to consultation. Because I do believe that there's a value of traditional supervision. I know that clinicians value it a lot. I know that it adds to aspects of their professional well-being that's important. But fit consultation has a really important purpose of making sure that we address cases that are not progressing or where there's feedback that points in a direction where we need to act. This doesn't always, or maybe even rarely, happens in traditional supervision. So there needs to be a space where we do this. And so we decided to rename the process fit consultation to make sure that all the confusion just from the words, that we eliminated that.
I just add to it's curious you would ask this question, Will, because Suzanne and I were actually talking about this before we went on the
Mm.
call, having watched the review of the book. And the shift from supervision to consultation is the only chapter in the book where we explain why we're making the shift. And that fit with an observation that you had, I believe it was you, in the review that said you missed some of the story, the larger story about fit, how it's developed, why it's there. And the only reason we did why in the consultation chapter was because it was a big change from prior years. Otherwise, it's supposed to be a manual, not a handbook. Not it's simply supposed to take in a very telegraphic way, say, here's how you do it.
And then, this is probably only interesting for the non-English speakers, but there are different publishers working on translations into other languages. So I know in Finland there's a process going on. I know here in Denmark we have a process going on to see if we can make available the manuals in people's native languages as well.
And I was going to ask that actually, Suzanne. It does seem like fit is more, I don't know if popular is the right word in Scandinavia. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's so hard when it's the country you live in, the culture you live in. It's so hard to analyze why. Um, but I know that there was a political change in this sort of interest in outcomes about 10 years ago. And I began teaching fit and implementing fit. And it seemed to explode from there, not just in Denmark, but also in Sweden and Norway. And then recently, maybe within the last 5 or 6 years, Finland has really picked up. I do think that it speaks to sort of an, a value in our culture where we believe the people we offer services to have a right to impact the service. It's even written into the law here that people have a right to be involved. And this is sort of this is a very direct way of making sure that we involve people. So I do think that there is something cultural to the explanation. And then I think we were lucky because when the interest picked up, we were several people that had done the certification in FIT. And so we were there to be able to support the interest. So I think it's sort of a mixture of things.
Suzanne, one of the things I thought was really good about these manuals was the implementation science and just the even the notion of implementation science. Like, as someone who has only worked at a huge bureaucratic university for 6 years, everything is a pain in the ass even if it's a wonderful idea. It's just like it sounds like everyone just wants to go, don't do this. But as somebody who has been such a fierce advocate for not only therapy outside and whatever we all think about that, but also fit, I've seen at large organizations that I can come in, do a training about something, talk about fit, offer, I'll help you learn the measures, I'll help you figure this out. And when it starts to slow down and people go, I don't know about this anymore. I want to really know, what can someone who's newer to this, they buy the book, they read it, they get bought in themselves, but they also work at a large organization where they have 9 different bosses that
Mm.
maybe don't really care about this. What advice would you give them, to the new practitioner to this?
I mean, for a while, and this is way back, maybe 10, 15 years ago, I set up what I call training groups, fit training groups, to allow for people like that, people that were enthusiastic about fit, but might work in organizations where it wasn't being implemented large scale. Because I believe that having people to talk to having support, having somebody more knowledgeable about fit than you that can guide your practice is essential. Otherwise, my experience is it drops off. But my experience with the groups was that meeting with others made people enthusiastic. It made them inspired, and many of them held on to working with Fit. I think this is much of what the Fit Cafes also has achieved for the people that have attended. That you've actually had a community outside of your agency, but a community of people that are also dedicated to getting feedback. So I think if you were somebody in a big organization, a new practitioner wanting to experiment with fit, I think you should seek out a group of like-minded people, or attend a fit cafe or do something to be connected to other people.
I love this answer Susanna's given. If you keep your expectations that you're interested in fit and I want some support and learn more about this, the minute you take the next step, which is how can I get others to do it,
Hmm.
you've entered an entirely different realm. And that, as we've talked about, requires a very different set of steps and actions and an amazing amount of patience, because organizations, probably rightly so, are conservative. They don't change overnight. They take time. The ship changes direction slowly.
It seems, Scott, that you're kind of winding down. You know, turning over the reins of the ICCE, and what's the next chapter in your fit journey look like?
Uh, Truthfully, to support Suzanne taking over the ICCE, its mission, I have really had some wonderful opportunities and chances to do more mentoring on a one-to-one basis. My profile has been more international and doing training in front of large groups. Uh, but I am, as you say, I'm stepping back, and I don't mean off, but back, and providing more. I am now the grip and the rigor on the movie set. I'm pulling the wires and hopefully pushing the right actor in front of the screen at a particular time. I think, and I'm looking, and I'm enjoying that part of it. I really am.
And this is work that's been going on for years. One of my visions has been to set up a viable structure for the ICCE. So the ICCE was dependent on specific people, but we were able to have a structure and a description of what needs to happen. And several people like yourself would be able to step in and help us. And the next part of what I would like to work on is to create spaces for the certified trainers and practitioners to meet on a somewhat regular basis. I mean, all of us have to work, of course, but I want to make sure that we create spaces, and it needs to be online because people are spread out, but to create spaces for us to meet in groups because, and this was my response to Will as well, I do believe that having a community of people that think in the same way as you and being able to interact supports us in continuing to do the tough, sometimes tough work of implementation in our own organizations. And I think my experience again has been when I've been part of the trainer updates. My experience is people actually leave inspired. They get a couple of new ideas, or they get insights to a couple of new studies or things we've developed. And I would like that to be something that happens on a regular basis. And there's probably going to be more, but these are sort of my initial thoughts.
Cool. It goes without saying, but I very much appreciate all of the work that you guys did because obviously it was a lot, and you've sort of clued us in to how difficult it was and the reasons why it took so long to get it out. I want to thank you all, and both of you for the excellent work that you did on those manuals.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I second Dan that it was just such a thrill to be able to read it and to have the conversation with Dan and then have the conversation with both of you because the two of you, I don't know how you're all positioned on the Zoom screen, but you're all at diagonals, Scott
Oh,
and Suzanne. Um, just the impact you made on my professional career is remarkable. So it's just such a treat to be able to get to have this conversation.
Cool.
thank you so much.
Yep. Thanks, guys.